Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, have you ever felt manipulated? I'm sure that maybe over the past few years you certainly have. Fear not, because there's a great new book out which talks all about the ways in which we are led to persuasion or how we are manipulated in almost all areas of our lives. It's called Free Your Mind here, and I'm very pleased to be joined by the authors, Laura Dodsworth, who, as you might remember, is the best-selling author of State of Fear, and the behavioural scientist, Patrick Fagan. Thank you very much for coming. I was fascinated by the breadth that you of the information in this book. Did it come naturally for you, Laura, out of State of Fear?
Yes, it did. For me, it was a very natural follow-on. When I wrote A State of Fear, I have to say for me, I had this big epiphany to see the mass evocation of compliance in people with very draconian rules, which was induced not just by a natural fear of a virus and a pandemic. You know, there would be a natural fear and a natural wanting to shelter and stay indoors. We know from Google mobility data people stayed home. It was more than that, of course. It was a deliberate campaign of persuasion, propaganda, nudging, and of course fear-mongering. And seeing how people could be persuaded to completely change their lives, to stay indoors, to stop working, having relationships, seeing family, worshipping, for the most personal parts of their lives, such as births, marriages, and deaths, to be dictated by the state. I had a big epiphany, and I thought, my freedom has been an illusion, but my mind is my space, and I will do all I can to control my own mind. So it got to the end of A State of Fear, and I, perhaps naively, tried to persuade the government to investigate its own use of behavioural science through the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, which failed. And of course I've written about all this, non-stop. And the truth is, there's no government white knights. And nobody is coming to save people from manipulation and propaganda. Corporations want you to buy brand A, not brand B. Charities want you to give money to them. Social media has set itself up to be as addictive as any slot machine in a casino to keep your attention. And governments are most certainly not above using behavioural science and propaganda on the people it's supposed to serve. And so I think for a lot of people there's a feeling of a net tightening. I think a lot of people relate to what I'm going to say, even though I can't pinpoint it exactly. There's a feeling that something is tightening, that truth is being squashed, that any deviation from the norm is to be punished. And in this time, what do? There's a feeling that society is like a plane in free fall. And when it is, you need to put your own oxygen mask on first. And so I've thought non-stop about basically the state we're in for the last few years. And I came down to the first thing you have to do, you as an individual, is get your house in order. And it starts with your mind. It starts with being an individual, knowing your own mind. And that means understanding how other people seek to control your mind.
One thing I liked about the book is the fact, Patrick, is that you have kind of little suggestions, not rules maybe, but suggestions about what people can do at the end of every chapter.
Yes, absolutely. So it's not all doom and gloom, although there's some of that in there. We're not in a great place, and AI and technology and social media are probably taking us somewhere dark potentially, unless we do something about it. And as Laura said, it's on kind of all of us, each of us, to free our own minds and take responsibility for our thoughts and our behaviours, because if we don't, then someone else will, the nudgers will. So these, and the book kind of does that a little bit, I suppose. We are nudging readers a little bit, but nudging them to take responsibility for themselves, and that's what the tips are for.
Because behavioural science, I mean, it's big business now, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. The WHO, the WEF, the UN, they all have behavioural science departments. They recommend the use of behavioural science. Lots of businesses have their own behavioural scientists in-house, or they consult people like me. And I think generally that's okay for businesses. Personally, obviously I'm biased, but I don't think there's anything really wrong with Coca-Cola nudging you into buying more Coca-Cola. There's kind of a transparency and an honesty there, and that selfishness. But it's when there's a moral imperative. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think that's when the use of thought control basically can be quite dangerous.
Yeah. Well, Coca-Cola don't have a misinformation unit or truth verifiers. They're just trying to make you buy their brand over the other brand. So it's very different when governments do it. I mean, you talk about being big business, and you've just mentioned all the supranational organisations, but I think people don't know how much it's permeated small parts of life. Back in 2011, the behavioural scientists who set up the government's behavioural insights team said we should consult with the public on the use of behavioural science, and yet they haven't. Here we are, 2023, there's still not been any public consultations. There's not really any democratic mandate to nudge us, but local government also has behavioural scientists. The government agencies have behavioural scientists. So nudge is embedded throughout government.
Do you feel kind of vindicated after the last book, State of Fear? I mean, because basically you were talking about the nudge unit, and then it's sort of the whole thing with COVID has sort of been unravelling, hasn't it, really? But that was one aspect. People say, number 10, the government used this, and you sort of think, well, you were writing about it long before that.
That's true. So the book came out early in May 2021. I can't claim it's any sort of sweet victory. It's actually it's almost like quite a bitter feeling that people come around to it now. But what I'd actually rather is that there is an unveiling of truth and that people understand what's happening. I mean, we had the leaked WhatsApp messages, Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages that the Telegraph published in the lockdown files, and he talked about scaring the pants off everyone. This is astonishing language for somebody who was the Secretary of State for Health. Now, there were plenty of systematic reviews in the past that showed that the use of fear came with physical and mental consequences, which is why it was most deliberately contraindicated in all pandemic planning before. And he's kind of gleefully talking about deploying a new variant to frighten people to follow the rules. Some people will still double down on that, and I would say that's largely because of cognitive dissonance. It's quite difficult to acknowledge that you might have had the wool pulled over your eyes or be manipulated. It takes some courage to even acknowledge to yourself that you've been manipulated. I mean, we found in the course of researching the book just how many times we've been manipulated ourselves. It was eye-opening. So I think while some people are doubling down, increasingly it's becoming accepted that the government deliberately frighten people to make them follow the rules, and I think it's increasingly a difficult position to hold. Although amazingly, David Halpern gave an interview to the Telegraph last week, and he talked about how it is justified to frighten people if people's brains are, I quote, wrongly calibrated.
What on earth does that even mean?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting language, because what do we calibrate? We don't normally talk about calibrating human beings or mammals or animals. It's as though we're little bits of machinery to be fine-tuned or social units to be shuffled around a board. But I think if you're the person who enacts these policies, you're probably likely to still be sympathetic to them sometime later, or even maybe be suffering from a massive case of his own personal cognitive dissonance.
You I think said that you sort of had another epiphany, if that's the right, or realization when you were writing this book. You said how many times you are manipulated. What do you mean, throughout the day, or what?
Well, I was quite cognizant of it anyway, working in the industry, but everything is manipulation. Even this conversation, arranging words in a certain order in order to influence.
Framing it, yes.
Exactly. Any kind of communication really is designed to influence people in some way. So you can't not be manipulated is one of the learnings that we had, but you can choose your manipulation. So one of the chapters is choose your illusion. So on Twitter, you can follow angry people, or you can follow successful people, or people who are healthy and have health advice.
Isn't the natural way that people behave is to follow people for confirmation bias? Isn't that right? I mean, I don't seek out people who've got hugely different views to mine now. I'll be honest. Why would I? I feel I know what they are.
I think we can all relate to that. It's unpleasant to have to expose yourself to points of view that feel jarring, but I think there is still a value in it. One thing the book's done for me, and I think it's the same for Patrick, is it's made me more consciously open-minded. I mean, I'm actually seeking out reading material and experiences that take me out of my comfort zone a little bit. there's a quote which I adore, which is in the book, from the businessman Charlie Munger. And he said the human brain is like a human egg. So with a human egg, once the sperm gets in, there's a shut-off device. No more sperm gets into the human egg. And the human brain is a bit like that. We allow ourselves to be fertilized by an idea, and then we're not open-minded to new ideas. But actually, one of the best things you can do to free your mind is to consciously be open-minded and to take on new ideas and experiences. Can be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's worth trying.
Yes, there were a few areas in the book. I'm always thinking of the people who are viewers here and the people who are involved to support NCF. Just to fill you in, we just started these local branches, right? And one of the reasons we have is that people who watch the channel, the most, definitely the most popular complaint about modern life is feeling isolated if they do not go along with, as you said, what it seems to be an increasingly narrow set of kind of rules. And so we wanted to create, I know, dare I say it, safe spaces for people to get together, and that it's proving enormously popular. But in one chapter in the book, you talk about how people should speak up, and I think this is germane to what I'm talking about. Obviously they should, but isn't it very difficult for people to speak up? I mean, in what context should they speak up, do you think?
Well, one thing I would say, there's a principle in the book which is called disrupt and reframe, or destroy then rebuild. So generally you have to break things down before building them back up again. And that's really the essence of pure brainwashing. If you put people in a POW camp, you kind of bombard them, you play rock music all night, whatever it might be, and then because they're so worn down, you can implant new ideas. The point to your question being, yes, it's difficult and it's painful to speak up, but you can create new things in the ashes, as it were. So I wrote an article in March 2020 or April 2020 about how face masks have negative psychological effects. I was a bit passionate, so I called it.
I was going to say, don't miss out the title, Patrick.
The excellent title, "Face Masks Make You Stupid."
This is how I found Patrick.
Nice,
I thought,
yes.
this is interesting. He's polemic, and it was a very well referenced article.
I put a lot of thought into it.
Yep.
I thought about it a lot, yes, and I referenced it. A lot of people didn't like it, surprisingly enough. I lost friends.
Really?
I certainly lost business contacts, and I can put a monetary figure on some of the work that I lost, and it was quite painful. However, from that I did make some great new friends, and new business relationships, new opportunities came out of it, and they were a lot better, really, because they were vibrating with truth, as it were.
Can I say, that's a really interesting point. There's so much we can say about speaking up first, about social conformity, because of course social conformity is fundamental to behavioural science and nudging, and it runs throughout the book. But I mean, at the same time that Patrick wrote that, I decided to create a kind of an art project where I photographed people, including myself, wearing masks that were embroidered with words like obedience, purity, conformity, to show that faith masks were becoming a vestiture of faith. They were becoming an article of faith rather than being based on science. And so at the same time we were doing these kind of different things, and I came across Patrick. I interviewed him for A State of Fear. We stayed in touch, and I said, I've got this idea for a book I want to write to help people protect their minds from manipulation, and he had been developing the same kind of idea for a book. I also lost work, and professional contacts and friendships were impacted by the stance I took at times over lockdown and masks. Nothing I said has turned out to be wrong as such, but it was challenging at the time for people, and speaking up first can come with costs. What I will say is, if you find yourself ejected from one group, that group appears to offer safety because everyone is saying the same thing. We're all drawn to being in a crowd where there's informational conformity and social conformity. But in a way, you can't rely on people that require you to say the same thing. If you leave that group, if you say something different, if you put your head above the parapet, you will find other people that have also gone out on a limb. And do you know what? Those people are people with integrity who you can trust. You find yourself in a new in-group of out-groupers. So you don't just find yourself out on your own, never to make friends ever again. There are always positives as well as negatives from speaking up. But the reason we included that chapter is that free thinking and free speech are really quite symbiotic. There's a lot of talk about free speech, and thank goodness, because it's vital. You know, we have a free speech union in this country that does really important things. You know, I'm a paid up member, and people can fight legal battles. And do you want to pick up, Patrick, on the importance of social conformity in behavioural science?
Yeah, so social conformity is a key pillar of behaviour change, really. There are certain things which make people more likely to do something, it being easy or seeming easy, there being some kind of emotional steam in the engine driving them forward, but also the perception of norms. So is everyone else doing this? Is it the done thing, the default? Is it the inductive norm, which means the thing you ought to do, the ethical thing? But what it really comes down to is that people like to be liked and they like to be right. And these are really two drivers of behaviour.
They like to be right and they like to be liked, but they also want to be, would you say, morally correct, even though they wouldn't put it that way.
Yeah.
Seen to be morally correct.
Well, everyone believes their beliefs, really. Everyone thinks they're more or less doing the right thing. But I think what's interesting is you talked earlier about people feeling increasingly disconnected and isolated thanks to technology. I think this moral virtue signaling, whatever you want to call it, it comes from a place of powerlessness, and it's a way of having power over other people. So I had a lecture once at university, which, as you probably imagine, is quite left-wing with the students, and I was talking about segmentation, so putting people into different groups, and one of the students put her hand up and she said, "This is really problematic, I find it offensive," and it's like the entire power dynamic shifted to her. And that's when I realised that this is actually kind of a power move, and I think it comes from people who feel powerless.
Yes, which also, you know, one doesn't on the whole generally believe people when they say that. They're just sort of basically trying to actually gain power, aren't they? One thing about this, we talk about social conformity and the desire for it, whatever. We've got a situation, I'd put to you now, where you have a majority of people believing certain things, or should we say being in agreement about certain issues, but we have what appears to be a number of people at the top of society or whatever seemingly determined to ignore those views. So where does the social conformity come in there? Because if you've got, you know, basically, I say, take Brexit, actually, right, 17 million people or whatever it was voted for that. Amongst the population, that is obviously a huge number of people, but you had all the kind of great and the good at the top basically saying why this was a terrible thing, right?
Yeah.
And yet somehow it didn't work, did it?
No.
So basically, is that sort of like the wisdom of crowds, or is it pure social? Because it couldn't have been social conformity, could it? Because if you were going to conform, then you would have voted to remain.
Yes, but the point we're making about social conformity more in the book is that it is exploited against us mercilessly. So I can explain how. First of all, to just go back a step, social conformity isn't necessarily all bad. You know, if you see 1,000 people running in that direction very fast down the street, might be a jolly good reason. They might be being chased by a mammoth, and you know, you might want to go with them. And we don't all eat the berries on the bush that no one else eats. So you know, there are evolutionary sound reasons to conform, but it's used against us. So if I give you an example, we know from studies that when people see crime reported on the news frequently, that they place law and order high on their priorities of political matters. So people will reflect back what is shown to them. So while the majority of people may have thought that we should leave the EU, that isn't what we were shown back, is it? In fact, there was quite a coordinated campaign to make people feel that they were making the morally wrong decision. They were the gammon, you know, the red-faced, jingoistic, overly patriotic fool. You know, a pejorative was used. A pejorative was used for them, so that you wouldn't want to be in that group of silly outsiders over there. You'd want to be with the good people, you know, all the people of the EU. So social conformity is a real thing, and it can serve some very useful purposes, but it's used against us, and that's the point. It's understanding when it's used against you.
But it didn't work in that case then, did it?
No, well, it's one of the rare occasions that people were genuinely given the power to exercise their choice, and I think it would be fair to say that elites didn't like it at all. And by the way, neither Patrick or I are remotely emotional on the subject of Brexit. We just wrote an article about Brexit confirmation bias, and instantly we were both accused, of course, of being Brexiteers and displaying our own confirmation bias. We don't really like to talk about our own voting intentions or past history, because it's not really the point. But we weren't displaying any confirmation bias for ourselves because we're not remotely emotional about the issue. But you see it all the time, people blaming now every problem that the country has on Brexit.
That was sort of always going to happen, wasn't it? I mean, you say, when it comes to speaking up in this particular section of the book, you say that basically people, they will feel better and that they will also possibly gain another network of friends and associates. I totally agree with that. There is a problem, isn't there, if you're at work, you know, and basically you want to make your opinion known about something, or you don't want to go to an unconscious bias training course, people are more likely, aren't they, to sort of shut up and just go along with it because they're just worried about losing their jobs, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's a very understandable position to hold. But we don't recommend people speak up only for themselves because they'll make new friends. It's also important for society. So we quote Cass Sunstein, who's a very famous architect of nudge. He's one of the fathers of nudge. He wrote the book Nudge. He wrote a book also called Conformity, and he talks about how you get cascades of conformity that run through society. And that's when they can be unhelpful, when everyone feels like they have to join the next thing, the current thing, or do what they're told. And it only takes one voice of sanity to reverse a cascade of conformity. When you speak up, you're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for your group. You're doing it maybe for all of society. It shouldn't, you know, the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. We illustrate the chapter with that story. It shouldn't fall on one innocent child to call out when your politicians are naked. You know, it falls upon all of us to show some backbone and civic duty and speak up when necessary.
Sorry, can I also add, there was a Czech dissident, embarrassingly I can't remember his name, but he became the president and he wrote a book called The Power of the Powerless. And he gives this analogy of a greengrocer who has a communist sign, "Workers of the World Unite," in his window. And it's kind of meaningless. He's just put it up because that's the default thing to do, the norm. But there's a huge amount of power in just not complying with that very one small thing and just taking that sign down. So then you're not propping up this ideology. So you don't necessarily have to go out and be a protester and risk your job and speak very loudly, but it's just the small things, like don't put pronouns in your signature or just something like that. Just this.
Well, no, but these
and
are
that's
important.
Where we are.
Yes, but these are important things, aren't they? For example, you know, we just had Pride Month, or rather, actually, it's sort of turning into Pride season, isn't it? Because everywhere you go, like I was at a hospital yesterday, the hospital's got this new, what they call progressive flag, which is not just Pride, it's like the whole shebang. People feel sort of, when I say oppressed by that, they sort of feel, I'm sick to death of this, but I can't say anything. I need that. That's really
well. That's one theory of propaganda, that it doesn't serve just to change your mind, but to remind you that you're under some kind of soft jackboot.
Yes.
And actually, we're talking about. I was mentioning the news before, how that can be used to create a feeling of conformity and political priorities. You know, we think about TV and propaganda as belonging to authoritarian and communist countries. I don't think that's quite right. There's various ways we demonstrate that in the book. There is a chapter called "Turn Off Your TV." Now we don't really tell people what to do. We can't help going with polemic chapter titles. In fact, what we'd encourage people to do is watch less and watch it mindfully and purposefully. You don't have to turn off. Even I still watch box sets, but I don't rely on the TV news for my news. But the thing is, the man who invented the term brainwashing, Edward Hunter, he wrote a book called Brainwashing and the Story of the Men Who Defined It. He said that entertainment is sugarcoating for mind pills. And he said this after spending time in communist countries and interviewing men who've been in prisoner of war camps. So it's not just communist countries which do it, but when they do, it's often not one person that creates it, it's a whole team, because that's what's needed for the psychological effect. You would think when you watch TV, when you watch a drama or a soap opera or film, that it's the preserve of the creative people who wrote it, but that's not always true. What's quite helpful to us in our society is the fact that behavioural scientists actually sometimes lay their plans out in black and white. At the moment, there's quite a lot of noise on social media about the very lurid weather maps, about all of the panic, about the climate doom mongering. That's only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's happening to make you decarbonise your lifestyle by using your TV. So Sky, licensed broadcaster, and the Behavioural Insights team, when it was 1/3 owned by the Cabinet Office, wrote a joint report called The Power of TV, and it was all about how to use the power of television to make people decarbonise their lifestyle. One important thing it said was TV has been used for public health, and listed examples of how TV has been used before by the nudgers. So if you've ever had any sense that something a bit artificial has happened on TV, you might be right. It might be an example of social engineering. So yes, we're seeing the weather maps turn completely lurid. We're also seeing modelling being used again with climate, talking about heat-related deaths. Well, I can guarantee nobody's been around each European country and consolidated all of the death registration data and worked out how many people have died from heat. This is modelling, i.e. it's a little bit confected.
Yes.
There was a news report on Sky yesterday that drew attention to a car that burst into flames on an LA freeway and says it happens in a blistering heat wave, and then puts underneath, we don't know this was heat related. Well, we do know it's not heat related because we haven't stopped all cars from driving in the global south. These are to plant the idea in your mind of heat being dangerous. But during COP26, all of the British soap operas converged on climate storylines, and characters swapped over, and the soaps cross-referenced each other. There's actually a very large-scale concerted campaign to use a gamut of TV programming, from news and weather reports to children's TV to soap operas, to influence your thinking.
This is all very much sort of like the ends justify the means, isn't it? That's their thinking about it. But it's not just, you're talking about all sorts of different programs. Seems to me that is the vital point here. You do know when you're being lectured, but whether it's a soap opera or whether it's a drama, it's not just a simple storytelling, is it? You use example actually as well in your book about how it distorts people's views of reality. In the sense of example, I think you use Britain's 3% black population, but in fact if you go to the television, I think that's something like 8, we get people writing about this all the time, 8% on television in terms of non-white. But at the same time, people say, well look, the commercials now on ITV, there are no white people, particularly no white men in them. So would you say that is basically people are being conditioned, or what?
So I'm in a mixed marriage myself. My wife is ethnically Indian, so obviously no problem against it. But it's every advert, seemingly every advert has an interracial couple, and it's tempting to think there's a conspiracy, and maybe there is an element of that. But I think it's more kind of an ideology that's kind of naturally developed. Particularly, people who work in advertising tend to be very woke, very kind of liberal, left wing. They're creative. Creative people tend to like to take apart taboos, and they like to disintegrate things, and creativity is all about kind of breaking boundaries.
And put new taboos there.
I suppose so,
But the problem is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Exactly,
you are. I think something like 3% of our population is black, but according to the Creative Diversity Network, 8% of on-screen talent is black. And I have no problem with black people on TV. It'd be the last point I'd make. But a YouGov poll as well showed that British people think about 20% of the country is black. So what happens is it distorts reality. This is an important general point about TV. People think they are seeing reality, but it's the opposite. A TV screen is a screen. We use screens to hide things. It's like Plato's cave. So you're seeing a distortion come back at you, and that, of course, is exactly why it's used for propaganda.
Is it
and social
still
engineering.
As powerful? You say the power of TV. Is it still, even in this day and age, like here we are on YouTube, right? Or, social media. do people? Is it still the most powerful pastime?
It's still the #1 recreational
Really?
activity in the UK and the US, and according to the latest Ofcom study, it's still the major source of news in this country. Of course, I think that's going to be different according to different demographics. I have the figures on the top of my head, but young people are predominantly getting their news, aren't they, from TikTok. Disturbingly.
Wow.
I mean, my teenage sons do that. They tell me about the news and I go, where did you see this?
Yeah.
I say see, not read, because I know what we're seeing, and it's TikTok. But overall, yes, TV is still a very powerful medium.
So do you think people should actually just turn off? I think, the chapter heading is turn off the
Not
TV.
right now, after this programme.
No, yeah, exactly. But of course. But I no longer have a TV, for example. I just found that I got more and more angry. I felt always in opposition to it. Has it been freeing? Yes, I suppose in a way. It's just that when you go back and look at it now, it feels rather alien. Do you have television? Do you watch TV?
A lot less than I used to. We don't watch broadcast TV. We gave it up for Lent 1 year and never went back. My goal is to get rid of the TV, but it's a bit of a tussle with my wife.
Yes.
You have to give us something better to do, Patrick.
We did actually do a week of TV free, and it was lovely. We just sat together, talked to each other, played with our son, listened to podcasts. But that allure of the hypnotic screen kind of pulled us back, although not as much.
Yes. I still like box sets and films, so I'm keeping my TV. The thing is, I had to keep a TV licence because my sons at school had to watch BBC Bite Size. So I was trapped by the very thing I'd love to get rid of. I'd love to stop paying the licence fee, but I just couldn't because of education. I've been changing my habits as a result of researching and writing the book. The thing I struggle with more is social media.
Yes.
It's easy to watch less TV and listen to less radio because, like you, I find myself kind of in opposition. And the thing is that the less you watch, the more when you go back to it, the more bizarre it seems, actually.
You see, exactly. What I was reminded of when I was reading your book is there was a great book by an author called Rod Dreher. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he wrote The Benedictine Option. And that was much more religiously based, but it was essentially about how can you resist. In the case of the Benedictine option, it was almost saying you can't resist, so basically become effectively a monk, go into a form of hibernation. This really is about how you can, in a way, sort of fight back, I suppose. And what it does come down to, in a way we didn't have before, is this social media, a tsunami of social media. I find that I like to think, I'm not the addictive type and everything, but I'm always on it now when I think about it. Always, You can tell because your eyes start to get rather sore after a while.
My fingers get numb from scrolling so much sometimes.
Exactly. So you've given advice in these chapters when it comes to social media, so what should you do? I mean, if you want to stop your children, as it were, basically, being affected by this, what do you just make sure they don't have phones, or what?
Well, you can kind of nudge yourself, and the important nudge here is something called the foot in the door technique.
Right.
So rather than doing a big thing at once, which could be overwhelming, difficult, intimidating, just make small, gradual changes to get there. So I don't think we'd say stop using social media forever starting today, but just see if you can bring it down a bit gradually over time. And there are certain practical techniques which can help. Some research has shown the power of, for example, if there's an app you use a lot, just put it in the second screen of your phone rather than on the home screen. Right. Put your phone into grayscale is something that I've done, and it really works. I mean, real life pops in comparison.
Makes your phone so terribly boring. But you do need to turn the colour back on for the sat nav.
And use your screen time facilities. I actually have given the passcode of screen time to my wife, so if I want to use more than my allotted time on Twitter, I have to go and grovel for it. But I just worked out she set the code as my son's birthday.
All right.
So I figured it out, but I'll have to change it.
See, this is how desperate we are to that's the power of how addictive it is. On Twitter they have this slot machine effect. You can pull the screen down. You catch up on your Twitter, then you go onto your WhatsApp, and then your LinkedIn, and you think, there might be something new on Twitter by now, and you go back and you scroll down, of course it dings and you get these little colourful emojis. It's designed to be like slot machines in a casino. You know, you can't help. You can't help it. So that's why sometimes you need these mechanistic and environmental techniques. I mean, in the book we give people mechanistic principles, but also psychological principles to make their mind more resilient. But if you have to rely on a mechanistic one, like giving your spouse your password, then you should. I included the story of booking myself into a convent to do a full silent digital detox. It was really hard. Now I'm back, my addiction is fully back to where it was a year ago.
But did it work for a while?
Yeah, it did. I think actually what I might need to do is, if not go and spend time with nuns in silent contemplation, although I liked it, I'd like to do that again. I think I need to probably have regular breaks, because that allows me to reset. Yeah. But the main thing is, if you understand as well how social media works, if you understand how the algorithms are designed to prioritize content, to push it up, to push it down, to play on your emotion, how it's all driven upon engagement, if you understand the tricks, you can engage with it more mindfully. Also, another thing you can do is you can sandbox accounts. You know, you should really only have one ID verified account, right? But you could have two, and you can use them for different things. And in that way, you can fool the environment a little bit. So, you know, I started signing up to dating experts for research for the book, I must add, and watching dating videos, because I wanted to see what kind of techniques, first of all, that they use, but that they would encourage me to use on other people. I did the research so no one else has to. But what I found was on my Instagram, all these little dating experts kept popping up, you know, and if you slow down, you know, these programs track you so aggressively that if you just slow down a tiny bit, you get lots more of them. So I was creating separate accounts for separate purposes to kind of keep it hygienic.
I see.
I would also say it may be difficult to go backwards in terms of your social media and technology use, but definitely try not to go forward. So stay away from the headsets. Would be.
I mean, this really is about trying to get people to take back more power, isn't it? And I mean, also to tell them that they actually have more power than they maybe think. Isn't that right? You can, as it were, sort of say no to the nudging, you know, with a few steps and a bit of self-discipline.
I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, we would say that no man is an island, as John Donne said. You know, you can't often be a hermit on your own, and you might not want to. We don't recommend that people cut themselves off from all types of manipulation. You know, we want to come clean with you. We're trying to influence you too, to buy a book so that you can learn not to be influenced. Persuasion is as old as democracy. We're doing it all the time. We're always persuading each other. But you should at least have the passwords, or, you know, the drawbridge to your own brain. It is about taking back control, because I think what people don't realise is the amount of information we're bombarded with, and the fact that everybody from, you know, dating experts to charities to governments are constantly competing for your attention means your brain is territory that people are fighting in, but you're the target. And so you do need to take control back. And while the nudgers have a very dim view of us, you know, they see us as irrational or bits of machinery to be calibrated, it's not the view that we take. We're actually really optimistic. I think human beings are incredible. Our brains are wonderful, and we have every right to be in control of what goes into them and how we ingest it and use it.
That's the point, actually, because it is essentially rather a contemptuous view of humanity, isn't it, actually, to be doing this sort of nudging. It sort of shows, you know, regarding people as sheep almost, you know, and so this is a way not to be.
It's reductive.
Yes. Laura and Patrick, thank you very, very much. This is the book, Free Your Mind, available obviously on Amazon, but also in all good bookshops, or the ones that are still with us. Very, very interesting book indeed. Thank you very, very much for coming and talking about it. We've actually got a few questions just for our exclusive members if you'll stay with us. But in the meantime, see you next week. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.